Hi, you're listening to the Build Your Digital Community podcast. I'm your host, Kristina Bartold, the co-founder and co-CEO of The Social Snippet, a social media agency focused on business owners growing their digital communities. On this podcast, we'll talk about all things digital community building so that you can grow your network and ultimately your business. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Build Your Digital Community. I'm your host, I'm Kristina, and I'm so excited for this episode. And this happens to me sometimes, but I invited my friend Marsha here today, and I invited her last week, and then we got on the phone, and we chatted the full 1 hour on the phone, like I'm 90 years old, on Riverside. And Marsha is a storytelling expert, an NLP trainer. She's a podcast host with a podcast that is incredible. I've listened to it, and I am just always so in awe of Marsha's wisdom. And when you get in the room with Marsha, which I'm so lucky to have had the opportunity to multiple times and call her a friend because we're local to each other in Waterloo region, she is just so inspiring and has the most amazing stories. So Marsha, thanks so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here and to be recording today.
It could have gone either way. We had so much to talk about. Even before this, I was like, I'm hitting record. Otherwise, we're gonna go through it. But I'm so excited for you to be here. And why I'm actually so excited for you to be here today is you kind of have this new venture that you're kind of on, even though it's not new, but you have kind of an offering that you've been brewing up lately. And I never use this podcast to pitch people by any means, but I'm just so excited about what you're putting into the world and why it's so important. So I just want to start by saying that. And then I also just would love for you to actually introduce yourself. Talk about you and entrepreneurship and kind of what you've been brewing.
Thank you for having me. I have been an entrepreneur for my whole life. It's just I've done a lot of different things as an entrepreneur. So even I spent 28 years as a registered kinesiologist. I was still my own an entrepreneur. I've done the brick and mortar. I've done the contract. I've done all of it. And I think that's a huge asset because I get to see all different aspects of business. And so I have a different lens when it comes to entrepreneurship, and I can see a lot more behind the scenes than some people can. I've actually I taught at Conestoga College, which is where we met, where I met one of my closest friends now, Heather. And so I've done a lot of different things. And my story really started to pivot and change when about 10 years ago, we were dealing with teen substance abuse at a level that I cannot describe enough of how challenging those years were. And I found myself really swallowed in shame, losing my voice, fighting a system that is ridiculous. And at the same time, losing myself, trying to save my kids, doing all these pieces. Through a lot of work and a lot of work, I was able to start to share my story in small stages because I started to have this feeling that what if I could do something good with the worst thing that's ever happened in my life? How could I do that? What would that look like? And I just got curious. And I really think that, when we are at a pivotal moments in our life, we can get stuck in victim mindset, which I spent a lot of time in, and we can start to change a lot of things by just asking different questions, like getting curious. What could I do with this? How could I change this? And it didn't take long before the stages started to grow and the opportunities started to grow. And I started to hear, connect with people who would say, that's my story and I've never told a soul. I've never told anyone for decades. And I was just like, what the heck is happening? People are literally being swallowed in shame. We are allowing shame to take over our lives. And I started to get more and more curious. And I decided that, I think I want to write my own book. And this is where I always say, you're going to have those moments where it's I am here, I'm going to do this, I'm ready. Be really careful who you tell. Because if you tell people who want you to stay small, who are scared for you, or are scared of how they're going to come across in the process, they could shut it down. And at that moment, it was literally shut down by everyone in my life. And I just remember sitting there going, I think I'm supposed to do this. And so I put my head down for about 10 months, and I would say a big majority of that was on my own. But during that process, I lost a lot of people, and I gained way more than I lost, to be honest. I gained so many more people who were the people that were meant to be in my corner. And through that process, my book released, and it went and hit 6-time bestseller in categories I had never expected it to happen. It got to sit next to, during those years, I read a lot of Gabor Mate books on healing, and I still have that shot of sitting on Amazon between his 2 books. And that to me was like, yeah, this is not an accident. You're going to do something with this. And so through that process, I decided to start a podcast. I just started to, just continue to share the story, grow on stages. I didn't have a business in mind until probably 2.5 years after that. And I think that was a blessing because I dedicated time to me, to heal, to get trust my voice, to really lean in, to rebuild relationships. I didn't walk out saying, I'm going to build a business out of the worst experience of my life. But what happened is just that, is that through the process of serving and helping others, I had people coming to me constantly saying, but how do you share a difficult story? How do you speak on podcasts? How do you write a book? And it was like, there was a moment I went, okay, universe, I hear you. I hear you. I know what you're saying now. And that's when it started to grow into helping others with their stories. And over the last, I would say, especially 6 months, I've published 7 times. I've co-led 2 collaborative books where that means I helped people to write and put their stories together, and they were not light stories. They were very challenging, heavy stories. And all the way to connecting with a person on the podcast who started following my podcast from Africa. We were able to get her story published in one of our books, all completely funded, just put it out there and people funded it. And we were able to fund her story as a survivor of human trafficking. And so I don't talk about light stories, but I talk about stories that affect way more of us than what we think, way more of us. And over the last 6 months, it's just been people reaching out about books. And I'm like, okay, universe, I think you're talking to me again. This is literally what we're doing. So I've been over the last 2 years, really diving into neurolinguistic programming. I did my practitioners, masters, and trainers, created my own certification because those tools were gold to help me in healing my body, what I had gone through. And at the same time, now we're branching that into writing your book, write your damn book, because people have so many ideas about writing their book, but it is probably one of the most common things that nobody ever starts. They have the idea, but they don't start.
Okay, I have 1,000 questions or thoughts for you, which is so funny. Okay, so firstly, I want to ask, and thank you so much for sharing that with us, because I know a little bit more about your story, and I know how important that time of your life has been and how impactful you've been to so many people and helping them get their stories out there, whether that's through your coaching or in this new offering. But what I'm curious about, Marsha, is when somebody has a story that involves someone else. So, your story, and I kind of talked to you about this when you and I had connected. I had asked you, when you're talking about your kids, and I was like, how do your kids feel about your book? Were they okay with it? And you were kind of I wasn't really asking permission. But it's more how do you navigate, when your story's so intertwined with someone else, or it's someone else's pain that has been part of the experience?
That is such a great question, and probably one of the number one questions that I get. And at that time, when I decided to write it, I worked really hard for probably a year to find people who could help me to navigate how to share a difficult story and leave everyone in integrity. I deep down believed it was possible, didn't have a clue how to do it. That was really what it was how do I do this and leave them in integrity? And so in the beginning, I know my kids weren't totally thrilled. I just kept saying, this is my intention. This is my intention. And I kept saying that, I promise you, it's not about you, it's about me. And so you have to be able to share a story from your perspective, all about you. If you're in the space of trying to prove why you're right and your position is right, you're not writing for the right reasons. You're just not. I would actually not encourage that, because you will attract all the people that you don't want to attract unless you want more victims, because we can all find more victims. It's quite easy, actually. Just go on social media anywhere and you'll find them. Yeah. But if you want to actually create change, right? If you want to create change, it does not come from being in a victim space. So that's the first thing I would say, is you have to not be there. And secondly, through the writing process, I feel like I healed in ways I didn't know that I could. And anybody who reads my book knows that like I dedicated my book to my kids. Like I thanked them for making me who I am. I thanked them for helping me to grow and change and be a better person. So there is like nothing in there. There's a couple points where I have to share the depth of the story so that people could understand. And when I did the very first run throughs, my publisher looked at it and she's like, "Ooh, we need more depth." And I'm like, "I don't want to share that stuff." And she's like, "You have to, because it's got to be some level of relatability." But it was from my eyes. And I think that's the big piece, is that there's no fault sitting in that book. It is just a story. And I've openly said that to my kids as well. Like I thank them for what they've done and how they've helped me to grow.
That is incredible, Marsha, because I actually think that that's so powerful in terms of like that level of blame. Like it's so easy when bad things happen to us for us and they're like inflicted, it feels like, by other people. And, I had a coaching client I was working with recently, and she's going through a really tough time. And I kept being like, this is your rise, dude. Like, this is like one day you're going to look back on this, and this is the thing your book's going to be about. Like, this is the thing your story is going to be about. And it's hard to see it when you're in the moment. Like, it's hard to be
Oh
like,
yeah.
oh, damn, this is really tough, and I'm really going through it, but like, my book's going to be good. But yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah, it definitely, I wouldn't have seen it at the time, and most people will not see it. And it's also a choice in how we choose to see it. And I just knew that I was at a point where I didn't want to be here anymore, to be completely honest. I didn't want to be here. I didn't want to watch this. I didn't want to be part of it. And it was like, something has to change. Something has to change. And my counselor said that at the point in time, she's like, if your kids come back to you, you need to be a springboard for them. And you're not. Like, you're not. You can't even take care of yourself right now. And that might sound harsh, but that's exactly what I needed to hear. And through that process, I started to put myself first, take care of myself, not own their choices, be in this space. And I think one of the biggest things I've learned through that whole experience, because I mean, I was a perfectionist fighter my entire life. Like those skills worked well for me. They were survival skills, is what I really learned. But they did, there's no sustainability in living like that. There isn't. Like it was going to take me down is what it was going to do. And so I learned through this process of writing and sharing like this forgiveness piece, compassion and grace. And I deep down believe that we all come here with a set series of gifts that we can use to make a difference and help others. And I think that we walk through challenges to fine tune those gifts. We walk through experiences. Life gives us experiences to fine tune those gifts so we can decide what we want to do with them. Because if, as much as I would have loved to learn my lessons any other way, I would not be doing any of the work I do today, which is the most fulfilling work I've ever done. I would not be doing any of it if I hadn't walked through some of the worst times of my life. So that story becomes someone else's survival guide, the survival guide that I was praying for years that nobody would talk about, right? Everything was super curated. Nobody would talk about it. So I actually like to normalize the conversations that people don't want to talk about, that we all want to pretend that doesn't affect all of us, but it does.
Okay, that's so powerful. The piece around survival guides, because I think that is something when people. So my friend Jamie is, she's launching a podcast with us. I think in the next few months it'll be out. She's writing a book, and her whole kind of premise is that she helps the wives of alcoholics. Because that's something that she had experienced in her own life
Yep.
with her husband, right? And so, and one of the things that really came out when we were at Chris Harder's roundtable, which is how we met, was we were trying to figure out like what kind of content she should be putting out. And it was like what came up, which was so insightful by one of our peers, was when people are in that space, like when they're in a space like the one you're talking about in the space you're at, they're looking for things in the dark. Like they're not like gonna go, like Marsha's not gonna probably run an event that's like, hey, your kids are, alcoholics or struggling with this. Come meet me in this gymnasium and let's like meet and talk about it. Like I don't know what the success on that event would be. Truthfully, we were just talking about events, but
Yep.
but people are looking for, these things that they can binge in the dark, and that makes them feel like a little bit more normal. And even like in the most traumatic things in my life that have happened, I've never talked about this on the podcast before, but I dated someone for a long time, who had bipolar. And it was very difficult. Like like I look back on the season and I'm like, I'm not proud of who I was in that time, like, and how I navigated
Yeah.
that. But I'm also so much better in my relationship today because I learned so much about boundaries. And I remember Josh and I dating early days and me being like, hey, like, these are the things like I'm not okay with. And like, I just need you to know that now because this is something that was really hard for me. And so, but I remember when things would happen, I would Google them and I would be like, oh, and I would look at forums and I would read these forums. I would never look into a forum for any other reason because I'm, 30. Like I missed the days where people were like on forums 24/7. But I would look for people and I'd be like, girlfriend of bipolar person, like, man does this. And I would read it. And I wasn't like, oh my gosh, like, I really hope somebody in my life has somebody who knows, like, I was looking for these things in the dark. And that's why I think podcasts and like books and these things that people can access, not only are they incredible, like, if you have businesses, we can talk about that in a minute, but like in these times when you're like struggling, you're there for somebody in a way that like you might never know, but like could be the make or break of someone continuing to be here.
I cannot love what you said more. Like, I really can't. I think that's such an important thing. When people say, where do I start? I'm like, well, what have you been Googling? Like, what have you been searching for? Because like, that's a sign. That's a sign that you were looking for support. I spent so long on Google, like so long. And one of the things that actually came up was my publisher said, like, that's a very high, you can look at like even back then, you could look at how much is that searched. But then we could also look on Amazon and how many solutions there were for it. And there was like next to none. Because everybody who had written a book, it was all about their kids passing. And she said, I think you've got an area here that is actually like, it's being asked and looked at regularly. And so that sounds strategic. It wasn't strategic, but that was actually just something to recognize that was part of it. And it's interesting because I had like one of the people who really influenced me years ago was Coop Blackson in his work. I interviewed him a few weeks ago and he said that we're always afraid of the dark, but the dark is the only time that you can't be distracted by everything else around you. You have to go internal. And when you go internal, that's when you start to realize that I have my own back. I can figure this out. I don't have to do it on my own, but I can do this. And I think that's those dark times, those like hours and hours in the middle of the night Googling answers, they were a bigger role than I thought they were. I didn't realize how important that time was. But yeah, that's exactly it. People are searching for answers in the dark, and you could be that answer for somebody else.
So switching gears for just a sec, Marsha, just thinking about this is, so one of the limiting beliefs I have around writing a book, and I'll share it because and Marsha and I have talked a lot about, I have an idea for a book. I've been dreaming it up. I've been like it's in my drafts. I've written 4 pages. They're quite good. Maria read them and she said they were great. Is I haven't experienced anything traumatic enough that's worth a book.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because Julie Menden, do you know Julie Menden, Marsha?
Yeah, I know her name. Yes.
Okay, so and for those of you who don't know, Julie has an amazing podcast that we produce called It Starts With You, but Julie is a public speaking and leadership coach, and I was telling her how I had like small speaking dreams, but I was like, oh, but you know what? I never had anything happen in my childhood that it would be good enough for me to talk about. And she's like, what? And I was like, yeah, like I said, people are speakers and they go up and they're like, this happened to me, and then I lost an arm, and like then this, and it's like, I'm in good shape right now. Like, other than my elbow being broken at this time, which I don't think is enough of a rise. Like, I don't think that this is going to be my keynote. But she was like, that is insane and such a limiting belief that we create. And I know, you've written a really impactful book about a personal experience, but you also help people, I'm sure, who, haven't experienced extreme trauma write books. And so I'm curious, how do you navigate people getting over that, like, I would say it's worthiness of telling their story?
Mm-hmm. Oh, I love this question. And almost every single limiting belief, just for anybody who's listening, always comes down to worthiness. Every single one can funnel down into feeling enough or worthy. That's really every single one, like everyone you think of. And so when we're in that space, typically what happens is we fall into this little comparison hole that my trauma is not as big as somebody else's, so who's going to want to read it? And it's interesting because that's a part of the story, but we all have something to contribute. We all have something that we've learned. And at the very least, to keep it so super simple, like as Ed Milet says, you are always perfectly designed to help the person that you once were. There's even a younger version of Kristina that is like maybe 4 or 5 plus years from today, that was searching for answers, was trying to find a way to use her voice, who would look at what you have created today, and she probably couldn't have even imagined
100%.
that what you're doing now was a possibility. So can you speak to that version of Kristina, and who would that help? Who would that serve? And who would that impact? And the answers are endless. Like, it's endless. So I think that's a big piece of it. You don't have to have a trauma in order to write a book and share a story. You just have to have a compelling reason why you want to do it. And a lot of times it is to help that younger version of you, because I believe that we're all learning lessons every single day we walk through something. We're always learning something. We get to decide if we keep those lessons for ourselves or if we pass them on. We decide. And I believe that when we come to a point that we've learned those lessons, they're not for us anymore. It's actually selfish to hold on to them. And I know that sounds bold, but it is. I think it's selfish. It's like no different than if I walk through the door. If I find a way to get through the maze and get through the door, but the person behind me is almost there, do I slam the door on them? Or do I actually say, you know what, this is how you get out. This is how you do it. So we get to choose if we share those lessons. And I believe if you feel even called in the slightest to write a book, share a story, or let's take it even further, if you want to actually work on your own branding on social media, then you got to find a way to share who you are. Because if not, you're going to be the vanilla of everyone else out there who's doing the same damn thing. And so you've got to find a way to share who you are. I just interviewed on my podcast, his name is Theo Tams. He blew me away, but he was a Canadian Idol. And one of the things that he shared is he was building his TikTok over and over and over. The numbers were there. He was showing up and singing, and people were cheering him on. It wasn't until he started to share his backstory, his connection, like what he'd walked through, that people started to resonate and connect with his story. He goes, you know what? We're humans. We need something to root for. So give people something to root for and to connect with you in your story. And it doesn't have to be traumatic.
So it's so funny because I'm like, I'm not like, I don't have enough trauma for this. And then when other people tell me things, I'm like, you need to do this with books, because it's interesting, because it's funny that people often have a lot of resistance in my world, like people I coach and I work with, that's like about a pivot. Like when they're like pivoting like niches or things like that. And so I actually met with someone yesterday, and he's going through a pivot, and he's like, but like, what will people think? Like, what will people think about my pivot? And I was like, people love to cheer people on. Like, I went from like,
Yeah, they do,
personal development, leadership coaching into owning a social media agency. No one blinked. That is so random, like, when I think about it. Like, I have a master's degree in conflict resolution and in leadership. Like, and I run an agency. Like, that's so random. But nobody cares. Like, nobody cares. No one's thinking about me as much as I think they're thinking about me. And so that's why it's such a gift, like, when we have the opportunity to actually really be coached by people who help us see our vision and our larger story, because then we're able to actually, like, live in our full truth. And people want that from us. Like, people want us to be talking about, like, what's going on and how we're challenged, and because they want to see themselves in your story. And whether that's Instagram stories or that's early, like, or that's a book, like, I find that too on social. I'm the same. Like, I'm a storyteller, because I know that previous Kristina, who's like watching all my stories and is like, I'm scared to come to a networking dinner, or I'm nervous about starting a business because what will people think about me, and my parents have really high expectations of me, and is that meeting them? Like, these things, like, I'm talking to them. And so that's why I'm like, yes, people need to be telling all their stories.
Oh, they do. Everything that you just said, I couldn't agree more. And I think I want to add one thing there, is the fact that it's not the story. Like, I just want everyone to know this. It's not the story. How much of my story have I just shared? I was a parent who dealt with teen substance abuse. That's all I've said. I haven't said anything else. But you can connect and go, God, that must have been tough. That must have been hard. Like, you can relate to emotions and experiences. That's what connects us. People need to see themselves in your story, not because they walk the exact same story, but they can all feel. We have core emotions that we're all feeling, every single one of us, every day.
Yep.
And when we can connect to somebody else, it doesn't have to be the same story. So the details of the story don't matter nearly as much as what you think that they do. It's, are you allowing yourself to be seen, to be vulnerable, to allow yourself to share that story so that that person can connect to you in social media and go, wait, I want to know how she did that. Like, there's something about her. Because I get people all the time who connect with me and they're like, I don't know what it is about you, but God, you push buttons in me. I'm like, oh, I love that. That's a compliment. Like, I absolutely love that. But most of the people that I work with, they don't have my story at all. But what they do desire is to show up confidently, use their voice, share their message, and help somebody else. And that's the common thread. So that's where I want to just clarify, when it comes to niche building, I don't get stuck on my client is 50 to 55 I just don't. I don't. My client knows what it feels like to be stuck in a story, feeling shame, not sure how to move forward, really stuck in trauma and trapped emotions, and they have a much bigger vision of what their story can do out into the world. That's how I refer to niche. And I actually think, this might sound, I think we're the niche. Like we are the niche. When we allow ourselves to show up and be seen, our clients, the people who can connect with us, they can see us and then they connect.
I love that. There's this guy, I heard him speak at, do you know Matt Gottesman?
Yes.
Yeah. His podcast is called The Niche Is You. And
Yes.
his whole thing is like, yeah, like you are, like, you're totally the niche. And like, that's something that I really struggled with being a business owner, was I was like, oh, like, how are people gonna like understand this, like, that I'm going into being a social media manager? Like, I'm nervous, like all of this stuff. And it's like, no one batted an eye. But when I tell people the story and I'm like, here's how we got started and here's where I landed, people are like, yeah, that totally makes sense. And that's awesome. And it seems like you're doing exactly what you're meant to do. And so I'm like, okay, but it, like, we get so stressed about it. And I have two questions for you, Marsha, just because I think you're going to really pour in on these two questions. Is one, I'll just do one at a time because I'm chronic for asking people 10 questions at the same time. What value do you think like a podcast adds to a business owner?
I love this question. So I think too, yeah. I think that there's so much value in a podcast, to be honest, because that to me is like my deepest connection with my audience is my podcast. I share stories on my podcast that don't go on social media. So I think people get a chance to feel like they know me, and that is there. The other thing that I will always have a podcast and books, and this is me personally, because A, I love it, so that's important, but B, it's free resources. Like, it is free resources, and it is your chance to share more of what you do. I always think back to young me when I was first starting, trying to find a way out. All I could do was listen to YouTube videos, podcasts, and books. That's all I had access to. And so I will never undermine the value of that, because I have people, I just had somebody last week who was like, that episode that you did with so-and-so really spoke to me. I'm like, when was that? And they're like, it was like, it was 300 episodes ago, and they're listening to it. So your content lives, right? It lives. So I think it's incredibly valuable for that. The other thing I think that is not talked about enough is, if you want to get more confident with your voice and your message and sharing, then start freaking practicing. Like, do a podcast, start it. And I say this out of love because I get pitched constantly and I love people calling their shot. I do. But if you want to be able to get a chance to get on podcasts, start one on your own, right? Be the change, be that version first, and do it, as opposed to just asking everyone else to help you with where you're at. Show up and be that leader in a messy action way. People are like, well, I'm afraid it's going to be messy. I'm like, it is. It is. Yep. It is. I promise you it is. And I've had other people say, I've listened to your first episode. Like, you've come a long way since then. I'm like, wow, I hope so. Like, I hope so. And I will never take that stuff down, because I think that's like, it's important to show where you've started. So I think a podcast, honestly, especially if you are a thought leader, you're an impactor, you want to make a difference, I think it's a must, personally.
And okay, and then so same question about books.
I think that everybody has a book in them. I think that it is one of those things that when you ask people, there's a lot of people who say, I've always wanted to write a book, but I didn't know what it was going to be about. I actually said that. I always wanted to write a book, but I didn't know what it was going to be about. I had no idea it was going to come from the worst experience of my life. So it can come from anything. And I think it's a very internal, incredible experience to walk through, to write. Not easy. It's not easy. I would never paint that as easy. But I do think that having a book for, especially if you're in business in some way, shape, or form, yes, there's a credibility piece to it. I'm just going to call that one straight. There is a credibility piece to it. There have been speaking engagements that I have gotten that have been paid for speaking engagements, opportunities on podcasts that I know I got because I'm an author. I know that. And I appreciate that. I have been given opportunities to be part of organizations that wouldn't have happened without being in an author in a book. So I think that at the very least, if you feel called to do it, then start the process of doing it. Because even if you don't publish, I'm working with somebody right now who she said, what happens if I don't publish my book? Like, she's got an unbelievable story. And I said, do you think you will be a different person at the end of writing than when you start? She goes, yeah, like I'm actually craving that confidence in that like growth. And I said, will it be a loss if you don't actually publish it? And she was like, no. And I'm like, so is it the worst thing in the world if you take the time to write, but you actually don't even publish it? It's your growth and your journey. So I just think we all are in this field of personal development and growth. I'm not sure there's anything that grows you like writing your story.
Marsha, every time I talk to you, I'm like, all right, we got to go get that Google draft up and get going because it is incredible. And I do believe, and I've seen it from my own, like I've had a number of clients we've helped with book launches, which I've been really like blessed by because I buy like 1,000,000 of these copies and then I'm like giving them to people on the street. But I really believe that like it is like the most incredible authority builder online. Like even if and in person, but like, you know, you could pitch for podcasts in ways you couldn't. Like you could do things like in other ways, like even Jamie went to Chris Harder and was like, hey, when I launch my book, can I be on your podcast? And he was like, yeah. Right. How many right? How many downloads that those podcasts get, right? Like, you know, people are so willing to show up to help you with the launch and in ways that I'm so impressed by that it's like, I saw so many people show up for my friends who had launched books and, you know, everyone's buying it on Amazon and they're like doing the thing to try to get it to be a bestseller and they're like making it happen. And I actually just think that like, it's something that lives forever and it's like a legacy project. Like you get to like get that book and it's like out there for good.
I love, yeah, exactly what you just said. And tying it back to what we said earlier, you're giving people something to root for. You are literally giving them something to root for. The people who supported my book launch, I probably didn't know most of them the year before. Like I didn't know them. It really gave people an opportunity to cheer on and support. And so I just think that's another full piece of it. And with a book, you know, it's one of those things that you have to work to keep alive. Like I refer to mine, I do clips on it, I do things on a regular basis. And, you know, there was an event that I was a keynote for in May. And that was from a person who found my book 2 years ago, wanted to start a foundation to support sober kids and families in Canada, and bought a whole box of the books, gives them away for free, constantly shares my stuff, and we have this beautiful connection. I mean, you have to work to keep it alive, but it can take a life on its own that you can't even see yet. I could have never seen that. Like I would have never seen that. And again, I think I've said this lots of times, but I think it's important. If the universe would have showed me those opportunities back then, I probably would have self-sabotaged them and not even started because it would have scared the shit out of me. We have to grow into the version who can do that. And so when you're sitting there with a book idea or the podcast idea and you're too afraid to start, you are literally blocking all the opportunities that are available for you because you're not even starting. And I say it with love. I say it with love. I do. But
Oh, I know. You say everything with love. And so, if I may, and then I'll let you tell everybody where to find you. But I just want to say, folks, like if you have a dream on your heart around writing a book, sharing your story. Marsha is an incredible resource. I know that like when I write my book, when the time is right, I know that Marsha will be who I work with for it. And so I'm really excited about that season for myself. But like if you have questions about book writing or anything, like she is so knowledgeable and comes from like such a great place on it. And I just like I'm so excited to see like the stories that you're gonna help people tell. Like I have such a vision for you, like that. Like there's gonna be so many people who are gonna be able to say, "Wow, like Marsha helped me change my life," and in turn, like the ripple of effect of all the readers. And I am so excited for you. And Marsha, thank you so much for your time. I like don't take it lightly that you spent the time with me and twice because I self-sabotaged the first one talking to you the whole time.
It was fun though. It was fun.
But I would love for you to tell everyone like a bit about where they can find you, where your podcast is held, and a bit about your program.
Absolutely. Thank you again for having me. I love having this conversation, and this is just such a beautiful platform and everything that you've created. So I'm grateful our paths have crossed, which has only been the last few months, which is crazy. Right? It's just, yeah, there's incredible people everywhere. All right. Just for everyone who's listening, like get out of your way. You'll find and create that group. I made it very easy for everyone to find my stuff because my name is long and my everything. If you go to Google, even start typing Marsha Van W, it will all come up. My website is Marsha Van W. Everything on social media will pop up that way. And yeah, I've made it super easy, super easy. My solo podcast is Own Your Choices, Own Your Life. And that's like into episode 570 something right now. And we have another podcast called Everybody Holds a Story. We're all about stories. Like we literally was what we are about. And the things that I have right now that can support people, I am doing, it's called Outspoken Coaching Certification. It's an NLP coaching certification. And I love the fact that it's called Outspoken because that's what I was told constantly as a kid I was too much of. So there you go. And now I make a living talking, which I think is freaking hilarious. So that's right, like that. And secondly, we are putting together a Write Your Damn Book Mastermind. And it is a 6-month container with support to write your book, content, right? Portal, all those things, calls. And it officially kicks off in September, but the bonus calls start in July and August. And I am combining different NLP tools, neuro-linguistic programming tools. I realized I didn't even touch on that. But where our limiting beliefs are, how our mindset works is all a part of this. And so if we can set you up for success as a writer before you even start, that's what we want to do. So we're combining that, and that's available too. All the links are in my bio. They'll be in the bio here, but they're in Instagram as well. And you can feel free to connect with me just to see if something is a good fit for you. But I can tell you, if you are wondering, do I have a story? Yes. Can I do something with my story? Yes. Like once you learn how to get out of your own way and step up to the role that I know you're here to live and do.
Okay, love that. And also, Marsha, I'm going to have you back to talk about NLP.
It's really fascinating. Honestly, I can just say it was the healing I didn't know I needed. I did not understand that it was the parts of healing that I was missing. And I'm a very different person even now than I was. I wish I would have had these tools when I was writing. I really do. Things would have made a lot more sense. And just to give one tiny bit of context is when we were going through all of this and I was in counseling, and my counselor watched me at one point, and this is really only 5 or 6 years ago, just to put into context. And she said, "Ooh, your reaction, you have PTSD." And I'm like, "I have what?" Like I'm like, "What do you mean I have PTSD? How can I have PTSD?" But our emotions live in our body. And I said, "What do I do with that?" She's like, "It will pass." And I just want to say that, like, it doesn't have to pass. You can find ways to support yourself, to heal. Because I'll tell you something, the more you heal, the more you can show up as your best version, the more you can step into the role that you're here to do. So I still deep down believe like you have to come first in this process. Even as an entrepreneur, you got to take care of yourself first because nothing else matters. Nothing else matters.
Okay, Marsha, that's an amazing note to leave that on. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who's listening. If you gleaned any insights, which I imagine you probably did in the first 2 minutes, just go give Marsha a follow, send her a DM, let her know what your thoughts are, share this episode. I'm so lucky to have Marsha here today. And thank you so much for spending your time with us. I know entrepreneurial life is so busy. So I'm probably joining, or we're probably joining you on a walk or something that you're doing for yourself. And we just really appreciate you making the time. So keep on building your digital community, and maybe that'll start with the book.
Thanks so much for listening to the Build Your Digital Community podcast. If you loved the episode, please don't forget to rate us and leave us a review. Now, we'd love for you to be a part of our digital community. Text JOIN to 855-908-4688 to join our text list for exclusive social media tips, or DM us on Instagram at The Social Snippet, letting us know what you loved about the episode. Keep on building community, and to this and so much more.